The most common form of despair is not being who you are. 3 months into what felt like my most authentic relationship, I realized my partner had fallen in love with my ambition. The problem? I was secretly burnt out and directionless. She adorned my drive and vision for the future, while I lay awake at night feeling like a fraud who couldn't even decide what I wanted for breakfast. Have you ever felt more unknown by someone who claims to love you than by a complete stranger? What I discovered is that we've all become strangers to the people closest to us. We've created relationships based on our greatest performances rather than our actual presence. We share our highlight reels, our optimized vulnerabilities, our carefully curated authenticity, and then wonder why we feel profoundly alone even when we're loved. What if the person closest to you has never actually met you, just your most convincing performance? This isn't about individual relationship problems. This is about how an entire culture has learned to optimize for admiration instead of understanding, creating a generation of people who are simultaneously overconnected and emotionally starving. We need to explore why authentic intimacy feels like emotional suicide, and what that means for every relationship in your life. Chapter 2: The Vulnerability Industrial Complex. If you've been on social media in the past year, you've witnessed the rise of soft launching, the art of gradually revealing relationship details through strategically cropped photos and carefully vague captions. A hand holding coffee, a shadow in a mirror, 2 plates at dinner with no faces visible. It's intimacy with an escape hatch, connection with plausible deniability. But soft launching isn't just a dating trend. It's become our entire approach to emotional intimacy. I discovered this while analyzing my own Instagram stories. I'd spent 40 minutes crafting what appeared to be a spontaneous, vulnerable post about feeling lost in my career. I selected the perfect lighting, wrote and rewrote captions to achieve optimal relatability, and calculated exactly how much struggle to reveal without seeming unprofessional. I was performing authenticity with the precision of a Broadway understudy. Have you ever spent more time crafting a spontaneous message than writing a work email? We've created what I call the emotional theater, a complex system where genuine human connection gets replaced by carefully choreographed performances of intimacy. Every platform has become a stage, every interaction a potential scene, and every vulnerability a strategic choice designed to maintain control while appearing real. Modern dating apps exemplify this perfectly. Your profile isn't you, it's your emotional marketing department. The photos are casting shots, adventurous enough to seem interesting, attractive enough to generate matches, casual enough to appear effortless. Your bio is a tagline promising depth without delivering access. The entire system is designed to optimize for initial attraction while postponing genuine revelation indefinitely. Swipe through any dating app and you'll see the same performance repeated endlessly. Hiking photos from people who haven't been outdoors in months. Looking for something real from individuals who unmatch the moment. Conversations move beyond surface pleasantries, and ask me anything prompts from people whose actual inner lives remain carefully protected behind digital curtains. What might your need to curate your vulnerability be protecting you from experiencing? The psychology gets more sophisticated with each technological iteration. We've moved from hiding our authentic selves to performing vulnerability itself. TikTok trauma dumps get millions of views, while the creators struggle with genuine intimacy in their personal relationships. Instagram posts about mental health awareness generate thousands of supportive comments, while the poster feels isolated and misunderstood. Consider the modern language of emotional avoidance. "I'm working on myself" has become the sophisticated way to say, "I'm not available for real connection." "I have boundaries" often translates to, "I'm emotionally unavailable, but want to sound psychologically mature." "I'm in my healing era" frequently means, "I'm using therapeutic language to avoid the messy work of actual relationships. Isn't it fascinating how you can share trauma on TikTok but struggle to tell your partner you're insecure? This creates what researchers are calling performed intimacy, connection that feels real but operates entirely on the surface. You can follow someone's daily routine, know their coffee order, understand their political views, and feel emotionally connected to them while remaining complete strangers to their actual inner experience. The theater metaphor extends to how we select our audience. Dating apps become casting calls where we choose people who seem likely to appreciate our particular performance. Social media algorithms ensure we perform primarily for people who already validate our chosen identity. Even therapy becomes another stage where we present curated versions of our struggles, carefully edited for maximum insight while protecting our most shameful truths. Have you ever performed being low maintenance so convincingly that you forgot you had needs? The collective cost is staggering. We have more ways to connect than any generation in human history, yet rates of loneliness and relationship dissatisfaction continue climbing. We've created a culture where everyone is performing connection while everyone feels alone, where intimacy has become another metric to optimize rather than a human experience to surrender into. This isn't accidental. The entire attention economy profits from our emotional performance. Social media platforms make money when we share enough to generate engagement, but not enough to satisfy our need for genuine connection. Dating apps profit when we find matches, not when we find lasting relationships. The system is designed to keep us perpetually seeking connection while never quite achieving the real thing. Why do you think your most authentic social media posts require the most editing? Even our offline relationships have absorbed these patterns. We bring the same optimization mindset to family dinners, friend hangouts, and romantic dates. We curate our struggles, perform our growth, and present ourselves as works in progress rather than humans in process. The theater has become so convincing that we've forgotten we're acting. We've started believing our own performances, mistaking our carefully crafted personas for our authentic selves. The backstage area, where our real thoughts, fears, and needs exist, has become foreign territory even to us. But this cultural pattern reveals something deeper about human psychology that philosophers have understood for centuries. What we're witnessing isn't just social media dysfunction or modern dating problems. It's the manifestation of a fundamental existential terror that Soren Kierkegaard mapped with disturbing precision over 150 years ago. Chapter 3. Why Authentic Love Feels Like Emotional Suicide. Kierkegaard understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to catch up with. Authentic intimacy triggers the same neurological responses as mortal danger. When we face the possibility of being truly known, our brain's threat detection system activates as if our survival depends on maintaining our protective masks. Because, evolutionarily speaking, it often did. In 1840, Kierkegaard broke off his engagement to Regine Olsen, the woman he genuinely loved, because he couldn't bear the anxiety of being authentically known by another person. He wrote extensively about this decision, recognizing that his terror of intimacy stemmed not from a lack of love, but from what he called the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo we experience when confronted with the possibility of authentic choice. Have you ever caught yourself performing emotions you thought you should feel, rather than what you actually felt? Kierkegaard identified 3 stages of human existence, but the crucial distinction for understanding intimacy lies between what he called the aesthetic and ethical modes of being. The aesthetic person lives entirely through performance, crafting their identity based on what generates the most pleasing response from others. They become so skilled at reading social cues and delivering expected behaviors that they lose contact with their authentic desires and values. I experienced this viscerally 2 years ago when someone I was dating asked me what I actually wanted from the relationship. I realized I had become so sophisticated at calibrating my responses to what I thought they wanted to hear that I had no idea what my genuine answer would be. The question felt like being asked to perform surgery on myself in front of an audience. The ethical person, by contrast, makes what Kierkegaard called the leap of faith, choosing to act from their authentic self despite the psychological terror this creates. This isn't a one-time decision, but a moment-by-moment choice to prioritize internal truth over external validation. It requires what he termed the courage to be oneself, even when that self might be rejected. What might your judgment of needy people be protecting you from expressing? Here's where our emotional theater metaphor reveals its deeper psychological accuracy. The aesthetic person becomes such a skilled performer that they forget they're acting. They've spent so long backstage in costume that removing the mask feels like destroying their identity rather than revealing it. The authentic self, the person who exists behind the performance, becomes a stranger even to themselves. Modern neuroscience validates Kierkegaard's existential insights with disturbing precision. When we face social rejection or abandonment, the same brain regions activate as when we experience physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex and right ventral prefrontal cortex, areas associated with physical injury, light up during emotional exclusion. Our threat detection system literally cannot distinguish between social death and physical death. This explains why vulnerability in relationships triggers fight or flight responses, even in safe contexts. When your partner asks you to share what you're really thinking, your amygdala may interpret this as a survival threat. The evolutionary calculus is simple. Throughout human history, social exclusion meant death. Better to maintain protective deception than risk authentic exposure. Have you ever chosen anxiety over authenticity because at least anxiety felt familiar? Attachment research adds another layer to this understanding. Children who learn that their caregiver's love depends on specific performances develop what researchers call false self systems, elaborate psychological structures designed to generate approval while protecting their authentic needs from rejection. These patterns become so automatic that many adults have no conscious access to their genuine emotional experience. Dr. John Bowlby's work on attachment styles shows how these patterns perpetuate across generations. Anxiously attached individuals become hypervigilant about potential rejection, performing constantly to maintain connection. Avoidantly attached people develop sophisticated systems for maintaining distance while appearing engaged. Both strategies represent evolutionary adaptations to environments where authentic expression felt dangerous. The theater metaphor deepens here. We don't just perform for others, we perform for ourselves. The psychological term emotional labor describes the exhausting work of managing our internal experience to match social expectations. We become so skilled at this internal performance that we lose access to our authentic emotional responses. Why do you think showing your real self feels like emotional nakedness? Kierkegaard's framework has limitations that modern psychology has identified. His emphasis on individual choice can overlook systemic factors, trauma, oppression, and cultural contexts that make authentic expression genuinely dangerous for some people. His focus on anxiety as the price of authenticity doesn't account for how marginalized identities face real social and economic consequences for authentic expression. Contemporary philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas have expanded this understanding, arguing that authentic relating requires what he calls face-to-face encounters, moments when we allow another person's genuine otherness to interrupt our self-focused narratives. This creates what he terms infinite responsibility for the other's well-being, a form of ethical relationship that transcends performance. Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of bad faith provides another lens. We often choose the anxiety of authenticity over the responsibility it creates. It's easier to blame our performances on external pressures than to acknowledge our role in choosing safety over truth. What would happen if you stopped being the person you think others need you to be? The integration of existentialist insight with modern attachment theory and neuroscience reveals why authentic intimacy requires such enormous courage. We're asking our nervous systems to override millions of years of evolutionary programming that equates social rejection with death. We're requesting that our psyches abandon protective strategies that may have enabled survival in genuinely threatening environments. This understanding illuminates why superficial advice about just being yourself misses the psychological complexity involved. Authentic expression isn't a simple choice. It's a sophisticated psychological capacity that requires developing tolerance for evolutionary-level anxiety while building skills for navigating the genuine risks that vulnerability creates. The question becomes, if authentic intimacy triggers our deepest survival fears, how do we develop the specific types of courage needed to choose connection over safety? And, perhaps more importantly, why do some people become masters at sophisticated emotional unavailability while believing they want genuine intimacy? Chapter 4: The Sophisticated Art of Emotional Unavailability. If the emotional theater taught us that we perform intimacy rather than experience it, then understanding advanced emotional unavailability requires recognizing how we become directors of our own isolation. We don't just act on stage. We write the scripts, design the sets, and choreograph the exact distance needed to feel connected, while remaining fundamentally alone. I discovered my own directorial skills when I realized I had unconsciously chosen 3 consecutive partners who were emotionally unavailable in different ways. The first was a workaholic who used career ambition to avoid emotional conversations. The second was a spiritual seeker who used personal growth as a reason to avoid commitment. The third was a fellow psychology enthusiast who could analyze relationships endlessly, but struggled to be present in them. What I hadn't recognized was that I was casting these roles deliberately. My unconscious mind was selecting people who would never demand the kind of vulnerability that terrified me, while my conscious mind told me I wanted deep connection. Have you ever sabotaged a relationship right when it started feeling genuinely safe? Most people believe they want intimacy while unconsciously selecting for its impossibility. There's a simple way to recognize your own casting patterns that I wish someone had shown me years ago. Think about your last 5 significant attractions or relationships and identify the specific unavailability style of each person. Maybe it was career obsession, emotional walls, commitment phobia, addiction to drama, or geographical distance. Notice the pattern. Your unconscious casting director has a type. Then ask yourself this crucial question: what does this person's unavailability protect me from having to risk? The answer reveals why you chose them. The sophisticated unavailability patterns I've observed include the intellectual who uses analysis to avoid feeling, the empath who gets so absorbed in others' emotions they never share their own, the adventurer who uses constant motion to avoid stillness with another person, and the spiritual seeker who uses enlightenment pursuits to transcend human messiness. What patterns do you notice in how you create distance when someone gets too close? Emotional unavailability operates through what I call proximity alarms, unconscious systems that trigger avoidance behaviors precisely when intimacy becomes possible. I've identified 4 primary mechanisms. First is the timing saboteur, where you create external crises like work deadlines, family drama, or health issues whenever relationships deepen. The unconscious mind becomes remarkably creative at generating legitimate distractions from intimacy. Then there's the standards escalator, where you suddenly notice flaws or incompatibilities that render the person unsuitable for deeper connection. Your standards don't actually get higher, they get more strategic about maintaining distance. The emotional archaeologist digs up past hurts or future fears to justify present avoidance. I'm not ready because of my ex, or what if this doesn't work out, become sophisticated ways to avoid current vulnerability. Finally, the connection theorist uses relationship education, therapy insights, or communication techniques to intellectualize intimacy rather than experience it. Knowing about attachment styles becomes a substitute for actually attaching. Have you ever been more attracted to people who couldn't fully love you than those who could? When you notice many proximity alarms activating, There's a specific approach that can interrupt the pattern. Before acting on avoidance impulses, create a 24-hour delay. Most sabotage happens in reactive states where the amygdala has hijacked rational decision-making. During that pause, complete this sentence. If I let this person closer, I'm afraid they might discover that I... This reveals the specific shame or inadequacy driving avoidance. Then ask yourself whether this fear is based on current evidence or historical patterns. This helps distinguish between legitimate concerns and trauma-based projections. Instead of dramatic revelation, try small acts of authenticity. Share a minor insecurity, admit a genuine need, or express a real preference without apologizing. Then notice how the other person responds to these micro-vulnerabilities. This builds evidence that authenticity can be safe while developing tolerance for emotional exposure. Why do you think your type tends to be emotionally unavailable in sophisticated ways? The most sophisticated emotional unavailability often disguises itself as psychological wisdom. Learning to distinguish between healthy boundaries and sophisticated walls requires understanding intention. Boundaries create safety for authenticity, while walls create safety from authenticity. When someone says, "I need time to process before discussing this," they're creating space for an authentic response. But "I don't do drama" dismisses emotional complexity as dysfunction. "I'm not ready for that level of commitment" honestly acknowledges capacity, while "I'm focusing on personal growth right now" uses self-improvement to avoid relationship growth. "I need clarity about my feelings before sharing them" protects authenticity, but "I don't want to say something I don't mean" uses perfectionism to prevent real communication. Each attachment style develops specific directorial techniques. Anxiously attached people create dramatic storylines that generate intensity but avoid genuine intimacy. They cast partners who provide enough chaos to feel engaged, but not enough safety to feel vulnerable. Avoidantly attached individuals design sets with multiple exit strategies. They cast independent partners who won't demand emotional availability and structure interactions to minimize vulnerability requirements. Those with disorganized attachment create scripts that oscillate between intimacy and distance. They cast partners who can handle inconsistency and maintain enough chaos to avoid the terror of stable connection. Recognition of your directorial style enables conscious choice about casting and script revision. What might your expertise at reading others be protecting you from revealing about yourself? Advanced emotional unavailability often involves sophisticated power management. Some people maintain superiority by being the one who loves less, needs less, or reveals less. Others use vulnerability strategically, sharing traumas or struggles that generate sympathy while avoiding exposure of their authentic desires and needs. The therapeutic relationship provides a useful model here. Effective therapists maintain professional boundaries while being genuinely present. They're emotionally available without being emotionally invested in specific outcomes. This demonstrates how emotional availability doesn't require total exposure. It requires authentic presence within appropriate limits. Kierkegaard would appreciate the irony that understanding attachment theory can become another sophisticated form of detachment. We analyze our patterns instead of feeling our feelings, discuss our avoidance instead of risking connection. The question becomes, if you can recognize your own sophisticated emotional unavailability patterns, what specific courage will it take to choose differently? And perhaps more importantly, how do these individual patterns create collective systems where everyone feels simultaneously connected and alone? Chapter 5. When entire cultures become emotionally unavailable. The emotional theater metaphor reaches its completion when we recognize that entire social systems have become performance spaces where everyone's acting, but no one admits it. We're not just individual performers struggling with intimacy. We're part of theater companies called families, workplaces, and cultures that reward emotional performance while punishing authentic expression. I witnessed this clearly at my last family gathering, where 5 adults spent 3 hours performing closeness while everyone remained fundamentally unknown to each other. My father performed the role of successful provider while privately struggling with retirement anxiety. My mother performed family organizer while feeling exhausted by everyone's emotional needs. My siblings performed thriving independence while dealing with relationship struggles they couldn't discuss. We all performed happy family while individually feeling isolated and misunderstood. What struck me wasn't the individual performances. It was how seamlessly we collaborated in maintaining the collective illusion. Each person's performance enabled everyone else's avoidance, creating a system where intimacy became structurally impossible, despite everyone's conscious desire for connection. Have you ever noticed how your family dynamics trained you to earn love through performance? When one person in a relationship system stops performing, it creates what systems theorists call a perturbation, a disruption that forces the entire system to reorganize. This explains why authentic relationships feel threatening, not just to individuals, but to the social networks surrounding them. Consider what happens when someone begins expressing their authentic needs in a family system organized around emotional performance. If the responsible one admits they're overwhelmed, the caretaker suddenly faces their own avoided vulnerability. If the strong one reveals their struggles, the fragile one must confront their capacity for resilience. Authentic expression from one person destabilizes everyone's carefully maintained roles.
This cascade effect explains why families, friend groups, and even workplaces often resist one member's attempts at authentic growth. The system has been organized around specific emotional contracts, unspoken agreements about who plays which roles to maintain collective stability. Authentic expression threatens these contracts, requiring everyone to renegotiate their positions.
What might your attraction to complex people be protecting you from experiencing with simpler ones? Workplaces represent perhaps the most sophisticated form of collective emotional unavailability. Modern organizations have developed elaborate systems for extracting productivity while minimizing human messiness. We perform professional selves that are competent, positive, and emotionally managed, while our authentic struggles, creative impulses, and genuine needs remain hidden. The psychological cost is enormous. Research shows that emotional labor, the work of managing our internal experience to match external expectations, creates stress responses equivalent to physical labor. Entire industries depend on workers performing emotional states they don't feel, customer service representatives performing cheerfulness, managers performing confidence, healthcare workers performing infinite compassion. These institutional theater companies teach us that love, respect, and financial security depend on maintaining specific performances. We learn that our authentic selves are not welcome in the spaces where we spend most of our waking hours, creating a fundamental split between our work selves and our real selves. The political implications are profound but often overlooked. When entire populations learn that their authentic needs and experiences are unwelcome in public spaces, democratic participation becomes another form of performance rather than genuine collective decision-making. People vote for candidates who perform the emotions they want to feel, rather than addressing the complex realities they actually face. These patterns transmit across generations through what psychologists call emotional inheritance, the unconscious transmission of emotional rules and restrictions. Children learn not just what emotions are acceptable, but how to perform emotional states to maintain family stability and social acceptance. Have you ever felt more accepted by strangers online than by people who know you in person? The digital revolution has intensified these patterns while making them more visible. Social media platforms become global theater companies where millions of people perform curated versions of their lives for audiences of other performers. We've created systems where everyone is simultaneously audience and performer, critic and reviewed, authentic and artificial. This creates what sociologists call collective loneliness, the paradox of being more connected and more isolated than any generation in human history. We have unprecedented access to other people's performances while remaining strangers to their authentic experience. Understanding these systems illuminates why individual authenticity work becomes a form of cultural contribution. When you choose vulnerability over performance in your personal relationships, you're creating small disruptions in systems organized around emotional avoidance. These disruptions give other people permission to risk authenticity in their own relationships. This doesn't mean individual therapy or personal growth automatically creates social change. But it does mean that developing capacity for genuine intimacy creates ripple effects through family systems, friend networks, and workplace cultures. You become living proof that authentic relating is possible, even when it's culturally discouraged. The social responsibility aspect is complex. With increased emotional awareness comes the recognition that many people's performances protect them from legitimate dangers. Economic insecurity, social rejection, family conflict, or cultural oppression. The goal isn't to eliminate all emotional protection, but to create environments where authenticity becomes safer and more socially supported. Why do you think workplaces reward emotional performance over authentic presence? This systems understanding reveals why superficial relationship advice fails so consistently. You can't just decide to be more vulnerable in systems organized around emotional performance. Creating authentic intimacy requires recognizing and slowly transforming the collective agreements that make performance feel safer than presence. The question becomes if entire cultures can become emotionally unavailable. What would it look like to create smaller systems, relationships, families, communities that genuinely support authentic expression? And why might this cultural healing work require challenging some popular assumptions about vulnerability and emotional openness? Chapter 6: The Dangerous Truth About Being Yourself. The most dangerous advice in modern psychology might be, just be yourself. Not because authenticity isn't valuable, but because this recommendation fundamentally misunderstands how human psychology actually works, and ignores the legitimate reasons why emotional protection exists. I learned this when someone I was dating used my vulnerability against me during an argument. I had shared my insecurity about feeling intellectually inadequate around certain people, thinking this was healthy emotional openness. Months later, during a conflict, they said, "Well, you always feel intellectually inadequate anyway, so maybe you're not seeing this clearly." My authentic revelation had become ammunition for dismissing my perspective. This experience illuminated something most relationship advice ignores. Vulnerability creates power imbalances, and not everyone deserves access to your authentic self. Have you ever had your vulnerability used as ammunition in an argument? Here's the first counterintuitive insight. The demand to be authentic often creates new forms of performance. When vulnerability becomes a relationship requirement, people learn to perform authenticity rather than experience it. They share calculated struggles, display curated imperfections, and reveal strategic weaknesses, all while protecting their genuine core from exposure. This creates what I call vulnerability theater, emotional sharing that looks intimate but operates entirely on the surface. You can witness this in therapy speak that has migrated into everyday conversation. "I'm triggered" becomes a way to control others' behavior without examining your own reactions. "That's not my truth" becomes a method for dismissing challenging perspectives without engagement. The beautiful irony of using therapeutic language to explain why you can't do therapy-level emotional work. "I have boundaries" has become the sophisticated way to say, "I'm emotionally unavailable." Most psychological frameworks assume that authenticity is inherently healing and that emotional walls represent dysfunction. But this perspective ignores crucial questions. What if some people shouldn't have access to your real self? What if emotional walls protect legitimate vulnerabilities from predatory individuals or toxic systems? What if your emotional walls exist for reasons your conscious mind has forgotten? Here's an insight that challenges even sophisticated psychological thinking. The desire to be truly known often contains hidden narcissism. It assumes your authentic self is so compelling, complex, and valuable that others should do the difficult work of understanding and accepting all aspects of your personality. But authentic relating isn't primarily about being known. It's about knowing others. The focus on being understood can become a sophisticated form of self-centeredness that demands emotional labor from others, while avoiding the challenging work of genuinely seeing another person's reality. Real intimacy requires what philosophers call decentering, the ability to step outside your own perspective and encounter another person's genuine otherness. This is far more psychologically demanding than revealing your own struggles and expecting acceptance. The most authentic people I know aren't those who share everything, but those who demonstrate genuine curiosity about others' inner worlds without needing to relate everything back to their own experience. Have you ever noticed how the demand to be authentic can become another form of control? The psychological literature rarely addresses a crucial question. How do you distinguish between healthy emotional discernment and sophisticated avoidance? Both can look identical from the outside. Discernment involves conscious choice about emotional sharing based on assessment of safety, appropriateness, and mutual benefit. It protects authenticity by ensuring it's expressed in contexts where it can be received with care. Avoidance involves unconscious protection from emotional exposure based on historical patterns, unexamined fears, and automatic defense mechanisms. It protects ego by preventing challenges to established identity. The key distinction lies in consciousness and flexibility. Discernment adapts to specific relationships and contexts. Identify applies the same protective strategies regardless of actual safety or appropriateness. This creates a profound paradox. Sometimes the most authentic choice is to not be authentic. Sometimes emotional protection serves not just individual psychological health, but social responsibility. Popular psychology rarely acknowledges that vulnerability can be weaponized by people with narcissistic traits, manipulation skills, or emotional immaturity. When someone shares their struggles, traumas, or insecurities, it can be used to generate sympathy that deflects accountability for harmful behavior. Create emotional debt that obligates others to provide care and attention. Establish special status that exempts them from normal social expectations, or manipulate others into sharing reciprocal vulnerabilities that become leverage. Some people become expert at performing emotional openness while remaining fundamentally unavailable for genuine intimacy. They share dramatic struggles while avoiding mundane vulnerability. They reveal past traumas while hiding present selfishness. They discuss their emotional journey while remaining unwilling to be influenced by others' needs. Why might your instinct to protect certain parts of yourself actually be wisdom rather than fear? The most sophisticated understanding requires holding multiple truths simultaneously. Authenticity is essential for genuine intimacy, and some people use demands for authenticity to control others. Emotional walls can protect legitimate vulnerability, and they can perpetuate unnecessary isolation. Vulnerability creates connection, and it creates risk that isn't always worth taking. Being yourself is necessary for satisfaction, and your self includes both wonderful and problematic aspects that require conscious management. This complexity explains why simple relationship advice fails so consistently. Human psychology operates through paradox, not linear cause and effect. What looks like emotional availability might be sophisticated manipulation. What appears to be healthy boundaries might be elaborate avoidance. What seems like authentic expression might be calculated performance. The goal isn't to eliminate all emotional protection or to share indiscriminately. It's to develop sophisticated discernment about when, how, and with whom to risk authentic expression. This requires recognizing that authenticity isn't a permanent state you achieve, but a dynamic choice you make moment by moment, based on complex assessments of safety, appropriateness, and mutual benefit. It's less about being yourself and more about consciously choosing which aspects of yourself to share in specific contexts with particular people. The question becomes, if popular advice about vulnerability is psychologically naive, what specific kinds of courage and discernment are actually required for authentic intimacy? And how do you develop these capacities in a culture that rewards emotional performance while punishing genuine complexity?
Chapter 7. The Courage No One Warned You About.
6 months after that relationship ended, the one where my partner fell in love with my ambitious persona while I felt like a fraud, I found myself in the same pattern with someone new. Despite understanding projection, attachment styles, and existential anxiety, I was still unconsciously selecting people who preferred my performance to my presence. Understanding the psychology of intimacy doesn't automatically create the capacity for intimacy. Insight doesn't equal transformation. This is perhaps the most important thing psychological education rarely acknowledges. You can intellectually grasp these concepts while remaining emotionally unavailable in sophisticated new ways. I've spent 3 years studying and writing about authentic relationship patterns while still struggling to show up authentically in my own relationships. Knowledge becomes another form of control, a way to analyze connection rather than experience it. I can diagnose intimacy avoidance in others with remarkable precision while missing it in myself until months later. What would change if you accepted that intimacy requires ongoing courage rather than one-time vulnerability? Here's what psychological insight can and cannot do. Understanding these patterns enables you to recognize when you're performing rather than being present. It helps you identify the specific fears driving your avoidance behaviors. It provides language for internal experiences that previously felt chaotic or shameful. But understanding doesn't override your nervous system's threat detection mechanisms. It doesn't eliminate the evolutionary programming that equates emotional exposure with social death. It doesn't remove the legitimate risks that vulnerability creates in relationships with people who aren't psychologically safe. What understanding enables is conscious choice about unconscious patterns. Instead of automatically performing emotional availability while avoiding actual intimacy, you can recognize the performance and choose differently. Instead of unconsciously selecting partners who can't meet you authentically, you can notice your casting patterns and interrupt them. The transformation isn't from emotionally unavailable to emotionally available. It's from unconsciously unavailable to consciously choosing your level of emotional engagement based on discernment rather than automatic protection. Authentic intimacy requires types of courage that aren't celebrated in our culture. It's not the dramatic courage of grand romantic gestures or vulnerable revelation. It's the mundane courage of staying present when your partner expresses a need that triggers your inadequacy fears. It's the daily courage of sharing minor disappointments instead of performing being fine. It's the ongoing courage of choosing curiosity over defensiveness when someone reflects your behavior back to you.
The courage required isn't one-time bravery, it's developing tolerance for the chronic anxiety that authentic living creates. Your nervous system will continue interpreting emotional exposure as danger. Your attachment patterns will continue activating when relationships become genuinely intimate. The work is building capacity to stay present with these responses, rather than being controlled by them. How might your relationships evolve if you stopped performing being fine with emotional distance? The pathway forward isn't about eliminating emotional protection or becoming completely transparent. It's about developing sophisticated discernment about when, how, and with whom to risk authentic expression. Start with micro-vulnerabilities in relationships that already feel relatively safe. Share minor insecurities. Admit small needs. Express genuine preferences without apologizing. Notice how others respond to these small authenticity experiments. Build evidence that emotional honesty can be received with care. Practice staying present with the anxiety that vulnerability creates,
rather than immediately protecting yourself through performance, analysis, or withdrawal. The goal isn't to eliminate the anxiety, it's to develop the capacity to feel anxious while choosing connection. Develop better casting skills for relationships. Notice patterns in the people you're attracted to, and ask what their specific unavailability styles protect you from having to risk. Practice being attracted to people who demonstrate capacity for mutual emotional presence, even if they initially feel less exciting than emotionally unavailable partners. Create relationships and environments that support authenticity rather than performance. This might mean finding therapists, friends, or communities where emotional complexity is welcome rather than something to be fixed or optimized. The honest truth is that most people, myself included, will continue struggling with these patterns at some level throughout their lives. The work isn't about achieving perfect emotional availability. It's about developing increasing consciousness about your relationship patterns and expanding your capacity for genuine connection.
Some days you'll choose performance over presence because the risk feels too great. Some relationships will remain on the surface because deeper intimacy isn't possible or appropriate. Some vulnerability will be met with misunderstanding or rejection, and you'll need to tend your wounds while maintaining hope for future connection. What would become possible if you chose connection over safety, knowing that both are legitimate needs? The goal isn't to become fearless about intimacy. It's to become conscious about your fears and skillful about when to honor them versus when to move through them. It's developing what Kierkegaard called the courage to be oneself, while recognizing that this courage must be renewed daily in small choices to show up authentically rather than perform perfectly. The people who love you for who you actually are, rather than who you perform to be, are worth the risk. The relief of being known and accepted in your complexity, rather than admired for your accomplishments, is worth the vulnerability required. But this work will challenge you in ways that no one warns you about, and that's exactly as it should be. Authentic intimacy isn't a destination you reach. It's a way of moving through relationships with increasing presence, discernment, and courage. The journey continues.